Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 15, Karl Marx. Let us have introduction about the unit. In the entire history of political thought, both in influence and in criticism, few political theorists can match Karl Heinrich Marx. Reflecting on the contemporary world from the background of Victorian optimism in England, Marx was confident of human liberation by transcending the realms of necessity to the realm of freedom. Along with Friedrich Hegel, with whom he shared an unparalleled partnership, Marx dissected 19th century capitalism as scientific socialism, mainly to distance themselves from the entire socialism of Owen, Fourier, and Saint Simon, whom they dubbed as utopian socialism. Like Hegel, for Marx, the study of history was of crucial significance. Rejecting Hegelian dialectical idealism, Marx offered dialectical materialism, emphasizing that the primacy of the mode of production of the material means of life essentially conditions the overall existence of human beings as manifested in human relationship. Understanding reality in terms of base that included mode and relationships of production and the superstructure that included political, cultural, and intellectual dimensions, Marx observed that individual consciousness was determined by societal process, emphasizing all history as the history of class struggle. Marx's stages of social evolution had five different stages: primitive communalism, slavery, federalism, capitalism, and communalism. Marx's major concentration was on analyzing contemporary capitalism, as in the first three he had little interest and desisted from making a blueprint for the future communist society, except providing a sketchy outline. He analyzed capitalism dialectically, praising its role in revolutionizing the means of production, while condemning it for its inequalities, wastage, and exploitation. However, he was mistakenly confident that the days of capitalism would be over soon. Many commentators believe that the best way to understand the Marx is to see him as a critic of 19th century capitalism. Now, his life and times. Marx was born at Trier in Rhineland-Prussia in a Jewish family. He embraced Christianity during his childhood. He studied history, law, and philosophy at Bonn, Berlin, and Jena. He received his doctorate in philosophy from the University of Jena. He was during his student days that he was attracted to socialism, a doctrine which was considered quite dangerous by the rulers of those times. Because of his socialistic convictions and his radical and anti state views, he was expelled from Prussia and was forced to take shelter in France and Belgium. Consequently, the French government, under the pressure of the Prussian government, expelled him from France. In 1849, he migrated to England and stayed there till his death in 1883. Next point is beginning of the intellectual journey. Marx had written so extensively on various issues of philosophy, economics, politics, and society that it is difficult to discuss all his complex ideas in a few pages. Because of a wide range of issues on which he wrote, it is equally difficult to put him in a straitjacket of any one discipline. During his student days, Marx was attracted to Hegelian idealism, but he soon shifted his interest to humanism and ultimately to scientific socialism. He was also influenced by some of the major movements of his time. During his formative years, the idea of evolution in one form or the other was very much in the air. While one version of evolution was articulated by Hegel, evolution of absolute idea or spirit, the other version was propounded by Darwin in his Origin of Species. Although Marx accepted a few of the contemporary themes, he rejected some others. His most seminal contribution lies in offering an alternative theory of historical evolution, the history of dialectical historical materialism. Through this theory, he rejected the Hegelian and Darwinian theories and propounded his own theory to explain the course of human history. Marx also entered in polemical argument with many of his contemporaries, particularly Proudhon and Bakunin and various socialist groups of the Europe. Now the next point is theory of alienation. One of the most original contributions of Marx in his theory of alienation. This is contained in his early work, economic and philosophical manuscripts, which were written in 1843 but were discovered nearly 50 years after his death. These manuscripts show that early Marx was mainly interested in the problem of alienation. In order to understand Marxian theory of alienation, it is important to understand Hegel's views on alienation. This is so because Marx borrowed his idea of alienation from Hegel and Fourier Pech, particularly from Hegel. He did so while dealing with the Hegelian notion of phenomenology. For Hegel, alienation is the state of consciousness as it acquaints itself with the external world, in which objects appear to man external or alien. Nature is the self alienated from the spirit or absolute mind. Man is self alienated spirit God in the process of de alienating itself. Feuerbach's position is just the opposite. That is, the man is not self alienated God, rather God. is self-annihilated man. According to Hegel, consciousness emancipates itself from this alienation by recognizing that the objects that appear to consciousness to exist outside it are only a phenomenal expression of consciousness. In other words, it is recognition of consciousness that objects are merely alienated or refilled consciousness. Marx vehemently attacks Hegel for identifying the existence of objects with alienation, which makes the objective world a more phantom. Marx does so by distinguishing between the objectification and alienation. Objectification is based on the premise of material existence of the object, while alienation is the state of consciousness resulting from the specific type of relationship between man and objects. Such relationships cannot be fantasy because objects are real. Since Marx recognizes the autonomous existence of objects, alienation can be got over only by object creating paraxis, that is, by changing the very condition in which the objects are created. In short, whereas for Hegel, alienation is a state of consciousness subject to elimination by another state of consciousness. For Marx, alienation is related to the real existing objects and can be overcome in the real sphere of object related activity. In Marx's view, one consequence of Hegelian position is that the whole history is reduced to an act of thinking, because Hegel sees all concrete events only as manifestation of idea or spirit. Since in Hegel the abolition of alienation is merely at the level of consciousness, it becomes impossible to abolish real alienation. Hence, men are forced to legitimize their chains. Secondly, for Marx, alienation is rooted in the historical situation and its consequences. In the capitalist society, the creation of objects or production does not help man to realize himself, that is, to realize his potential. This ability of man to realize his potential while being engaged in the creation of objects causes alienation. Hence, alienation will be overcome when the production of objects will lead to unfolding of the human potentialities. In capitalism, production takes place in alienation circumstances, and this makes objectification into dehumanization. The object produced by the laborer by his labor, its product, now stands opposite to him as an alien being, as a power of independent of him. In essence, labor itself becomes an object. What is embodied in the product of his labor does not belong to the laborer. It is no longer his own. It belongs to someone else, the capitalist. The greater this product is, the more he is diminished and dehumanized. Thus, you can say that for Marx, labor becomes a dehumanizing act when it is not a voluntary but a coercive activity. But what makes the labor coercive is not the nature of the labor per se, but the historical conditions in which this labor is performed. Hence, the society that will abolish alienation will not abolish labor. It will only abolish the alienating conditions in which labor is performed. In other words, labor will exist even in the socialist and the communist society, but it will not be a coercive activity. The crucial question is whether the work serves as a means for existence for the laborer or becomes the very content of his life. This amounts to saying that objectification will continue even under communism, but alienation will not. From the above account, you must have noticed that alienation as it exists in the capitalist society has many dimensions. However, three dimensions are fundamental: man's alienation from nature, alienation from humanity or fellow workers, and alienation from himself. Alienation from nature implies that laborer is alienated from his faculty and capacity of shaping the world because the world appears to him as his master. Secondly, alienation occurs because the worker's inability to own the product of his work, which belongs to someone else. Not only this, even his labor is not his own because he has sold it to another. Moreover, what is embodied in the product of his labor is no longer his own. Hence, he gets alienated from the object of his labor. This object which he has produced assumes an external existence. It exists independently outside him and appears alien to him. It stands opposite to him as an autonomous power, as a hostile force. Thirdly, alienation occurs because work for the laborer is not voluntary, but it is imposed on him. It is forced labor that he has to perform. It is not for the satisfaction of his needs, but for the satisfaction of others' needs. Hence, work for him becomes drudgery, a monotonous and boring activity. For 12 hours, the worker weaves, spins, drills, turns, builds, shovels, breaks stones, carries loads without knowing why he is doing all this. Another aspect of alienation is the domination of dead, objectified labor or machinery over the living labor. In this process, the worker becomes an appendage of the machine. His product, his machines become his real masters. He feels alienated from himself. It is because of this that man feels himself to be freely active only in animal functions, eating, drinking, and procreating. while in his human functions he is reduced to an animal. The animal in him becomes human, and the human in him becomes animal. Marx further explains it by saying that the less you eat, drink, buy books, go to theater or to ball or to public house, and the less you think, love, theorize, sing, paint, fence, etc., the more you will be able to save, and the greater will become your treasure, which neither moth nor rust with corrupt your capital. The less you are, the less you express your life, the more you have, the greater in your alienated life, and greater is the saving of your alienated being. The above quotation shows that property for Marx is not a realization or fulfillment of personality, but its negation. Hence, it is not only the propertyless who are alienated, but so are those who have property. The possession of property by one person necessarily entails its non possession by another. However, in Marx's views, the problem of alienation cannot be solved by assuring property to all, but by abolishing all property relations. Hence, the abolition of capitalism is a necessary prerequisite for the abolition of alienation. Capitalism, by definition, entails alienation. Communism for Marx is not only the positive abolition of private property, but also the abolition of human self-alienation. Therefore, it is the return of man to himself as a social, that is, really human being. Secondly, Marx argued in his The German ideology that the main cause of alienation is fixation of activity, due to which what we ourselves produce becomes subjective power above us, going out of our control, thwarting our expectations, bringing to naught our calculations. Man will be redeemed from alienation in the communist society, because nobody will have any exclusive sphere of activity, and each one can become accomplished in any branch of he wishes. There it will be possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, doing just that which gives me pleasure, without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic. This will be the real state of freedom for man from alienation and exploitation. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.